put a GPS tracker in my husband's SUV because I was certain he was cheating on me. For 6 Fridays, it led me to the same old brick house on the edge of town. On the 7th Friday, I finally followed him. I didn't knock. I stood beneath an open kitchen window and listened. "She can never find out," my husband whispered. "I've already lied to her for 16 years. A woman answered softly. "You know she deserves the truth." David didn't respond right away. When he finally spoke, his voice broke. "If I tell her now, I'll lose my family." I felt my knees give out beneath me. 16 years of marriage, a secret woman, a hidden life. I should have walked away. Instead, I stayed long enough to hear one more sentence. It changed everything. I just didn't realize. I was still completely wrong. 3 months earlier, if someone had asked me that spring whether I trusted my husband, I would have answered before they finished the question. Of course I do. After 16 years of marriage, trust no longer felt like a decision. It felt like breathing. David knew I couldn't sleep unless the bedroom window was cracked open. He knew I hated cilantro. He knew I cried every time we watched The Green Mile, even after 10 viewings, and every Friday morning before work, he kissed my forehead and said the same thing. "See you tonight." Small, ordinary, comforting. Looking back, I think ordinary moments are the cruelest things to lose, because you never realize they're special until they're gone. We lived in a quiet suburb outside Portland. Our daughter Lily was 15. She had David's sense of humor and my terrible habit of leaving coffee cups everywhere. Most mornings followed the same routine. Coffee machine hissing. David searching for keys that were always in his jacket pocket. "Has anyone seen my keys?" Lily, without looking up. "Left pocket." He checked the right one first, then laughed. "One day you're going to move out and I'll never find anything again. That's why you had me." I still remember that laugh. If someone had told me our marriage would be hanging by a thread a few weeks later, I would have laughed too. The first Friday didn't feel important. David texted at lunch, "Running late, don't wait for dinner." He came home after 9, muddy boots, heavy shoulders, apologized 3 times over reheated lasagna. It wasn't the answer of a guilty man. It was the answer of a tired husband. The second Friday felt almost identical. Almost. This time he didn't come home until 7:43, after I'd called and gotten voicemail, after the soup had gone cold twice. His hair was damp, dirt on his jeans. He apologized. We talked about ordinary things. Nothing seemed wrong, except one detail. His phone slipped from his pocket. The screen lit for a second. Payment received. Thank you again. No name, no photo. He picked it up so fast I almost wondered if I'd imagined it. Saturday washed most of it away. David spent 3 hours helping Mr. Reynolds repair his roof after the storm. The man was 82 and had insisted on climbing the ladder himself. I argued with him for 20 minutes, David said, washing his hands. And he won. I laughed. He was the kind of man who shoveled our elderly neighbor's driveway before doing our own. The kind of father who never missed one of Lily's volleyball games. People like that didn't cheat, did they? Monday, I told my friend Megan everything. The missed calls, the late Fridays, the strange notification. She asked if David had ever given me a reason not to trust him in 16 years. Not once. Then don't let 3 Fridays erase 16 years. I wanted to believe her, but doubt is a strange thing. Once it finds a place to live, it starts making itself at home. "Have you thought about what you'll do if it's true?" Megan asked quietly before we said goodbye. I didn't have an answer. That was the part that scared me most. The third Friday, David didn't answer his phone at all. Not once, all afternoon. Something inside me shifted, quietly, like a crack spreading across a windshield. I stopped looking for explanations and started looking for answers. The answer came by accident the following Tuesday. His laptop was open. I was only supposed to send an email. Another notification appeared in the corner of the screen. Transfer completed. Amount, $2,500. We'd never hidden finances from each other. One joint account. Every major expense discussed together. Always. That evening, David seemed happier than he had in weeks. He made tacos, played music while cooking, even danced with Lily in the kitchen. "Dad, stop. You used to think I was cool. I was 6. What happened?" You kept dancing. The whole kitchen laughed. For a few precious minutes, everything felt normal again. That was the worst part. Nothing about him matched the picture forming in my head. Thursday at the bank, I asked the teller how much cash had come out of our account that month. 4 withdrawals, $2,000, $2,500, $1,800, $3,000, all on Fridays. Nearly $10,000 gone without a single conversation. I wasn't just confused anymore. I was scared. That Friday, David hugged me before leaving and said, "You know you can tell me anything." I wanted to say, "So can you." Instead, I just said, "I know." That afternoon, Megan asked me the question that mattered. If you had a way to know where he goes every Friday, would you use it? I looked at his empty parking space and almost in a whisper said, "I think I already know the answer." I opened a browser and typed 3 words, GPS tracker for cars. The electronics store was almost empty. A college student in a blue polo greeted me. "Can I help you find something?" I almost turned around. "I'm looking for a GPS tracker." He nodded without asking why. "We sell a lot of these, for company vehicles, mostly." He placed a tiny black device on the counter, no bigger than a matchbox. "Updates every 30 seconds. Magnetic mount. You just attach it underneath the vehicle." Such a tiny thing. So much potential to destroy a marriage. "I'll take it." I paid in cash, so it would never show up on a statement. For the first time in 16 years, I was keeping a secret from David. That evening, the unopened box sat on the counter. David spent it fixing a loose cabinet hinge in the laundry room. "I think I'm finally winning," he said, grinning, against the cabinet. It put up a good fight. For a second, everything felt normal again. At midnight, I carried the tracker to the garage. His SUV sat there, waiting for another ordinary morning. One part of me whispered, "Go back inside. Trust your husband." The other answered, "If you trust him, why are you standing here?" The magnet clicked into place, barely audible. To me, it sounded deafening. For a week, nothing. The blue dot stayed at his office until he drove home. I almost believed I'd made a terrible mistake. Then Friday came again. Vehicle in motion. The dot pulled away from his office and turned west. Away from downtown. Away from every construction site he'd ever mentioned. 23 minutes later, it stopped. No business, no warehouse. Just an old residential street on the edge of town. For 3 more Fridays, the exact same thing happened. Same time, same road, same house. By the 6th Friday, I no longer wondered whether David was hiding something. I only wondered who was waiting for him. Friday number 7 began like every other. "See you tonight. Drive safe." I always do. The moment his SUV disappeared, I opened the app one last time and closed it. This time, I wasn't going to follow the blue dot. I was going to follow my husband. Following someone is nothing like the movies. No dramatic music, no high-speed chase, just traffic, school buses, delivery vans. Every time another car slipped between us, panic rushed through me. Every time I caught sight of his SUV again, I breathed easier. He never checked his mirrors, never hesitated, never acted like a man hiding a secret. That somehow made everything worse. The farther west we drove, the older the city became. Coffee shops disappeared. Fresh paint gave way to cracked brick. Nothing looked dangerous, just forgotten. I parked around the corner from an old brick house with a crooked shutter and a porch swing moving in the wind. David unloaded grocery bags, a cardboard box, and finally a bouquet of sunflowers. Not roses, not orchids, just ordinary sunflowers. A woman opened the door and smiled with relief, like someone who'd been waiting. She touched his arm as they disappeared inside. I had seen enough, or at least I thought I had. I almost walked away. Instead, I circled to the kitchen window, cracked open just enough for warm light and quiet voices to slip outside. "She can never find out," David said. "You know she deserves the truth," the woman answered. Silence. Then, barely above a whisper, "I've already lied to her for 16 years. I can't keep pretending. So tell her. I can't. Because if I tell her now, I'll lose my family." My knees buckled. I grabbed the windowsill to steady myself, my pulse roaring so loud in my ears I was sure it would give me away. Every missed call, every Friday, every dollar, every strange smile, It all seemed to make sense. Or at least, it finally seemed to. Then a child laughed inside. David laughed too. I couldn't listen anymore. I turned to leave and looked back one last time. Through the curtain, David stood alone at the sink, head lowered, one hand over his face. He wasn't laughing anymore. He looked like a man trying very hard not to fall apart. Something didn't fit. And that frightened me more than everything I'd already heard. I drove home on instinct, remembering no lights, no turns. Lily was on the couch doing homework. "Hey, Mom." "Hey, sweetheart," I could barely answer. 16 years. The exact length of our marriage. The number wouldn't stop echoing. David came home at 7 with lemon cake, my favorite, smiling like nothing had happened. I understood something terrifying. Whatever life he'd built behind my back, he had become very good at living both versions of it. Dinner was unbearable. Every time he smiled, I heard his voice under that window. She can never find out. I've already lied to her for 16 years. That night, I didn't sleep. At 2 a.m., I opened the GPS app again, and for the first time, checked the property records for that address. Not the woman's name, not David's. Daniel Carter. I searched everywhere, nothing useful. If David had another family, who was Daniel? And why wasn't the house in the woman's name? For the first time, the story I'd built in my head wasn't complete anymore. There was still one missing piece, and somehow I knew it was the most important one. The next morning, I finally asked him directly, "Where were you yesterday?" He looked down at his coffee. "I told you, I had work." "No, you didn't." Silence filled the kitchen. For a moment, I thought he'd finally tell me everything. Instead, he looked away. "I'm sorry, it's complicated." I picked up my cup and walked to the sink. Only with my back turned did I whisper, "I know." "What do you mean?" he asked. I looked out the kitchen window. "I followed you Friday. I heard you. Through the kitchen window at that house." David went pale. He sat down slowly, like his legs had stopped working. My own hands wouldn't stop shaking. "How much did you hear?" "Enough. That you've lied to me for 16 years. That you're going to lose your family if you tell me the truth." He put his face in his hands. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said quietly, "It's not what you think." "Then tell me what it is." That's when it finally came out. Not an affair, but a truth 22 years old. Before he'd ever met me, David had a son. A relationship that ended badly. A young man he'd lost contact with for years. A mistake he'd never told me about because he was terrified of what it would cost him. That son was Daniel, now grown, married to a woman named Claire, father to a little girl named Ellie. The old brick house was theirs. "I found him 3 years ago," David said. "I hired someone to look. I didn't know if he'd even want to meet me. I didn't know if I deserved for him to." 3 years. My voice barely came out. "You've known him for 3 years, and you never told me." I was afraid. Every time I tried to find the words, I pictured your face, and I lost my nerve. And the longer I waited, the harder it got, until it felt like there was no version of telling you that wouldn't destroy us. So instead, you decided to just live 2 lives. I never wanted 2 lives. He said it so quietly, I almost missed it. I only wanted enough time to figure out how to bring them together. The cash, the transfers, money quietly sent to help them, and gas money for driving Claire's father to physical therapy every Friday. The one afternoon a week Daniel had off from a 6-day job. The woman under the window wasn't a mistress. She was Claire, telling David for months that Amy deserved to know the truth. "She can never find out" hadn't meant an affair. It meant a son David was terrified I would never forgive him for hiding. I sat across from him at our kitchen table, the same table where he'd eaten reheated lasagna and apologized 3 times. And I didn't know whether to scream or cry or both. 22 years. An entire hidden chapter of the man I thought I knew completely. Why didn't you just tell me from the beginning, before we even got married? Because I was 23 and terrified. And by the time I was brave enough, I'd already convinced myself it was too late to matter. And then it was 10 years too late. And then it was 16. He looked up at me, eyes red. There was never a good time. I just kept choosing silence because it was easier than watching you look at me the way you're looking at me right now. I didn't answer him that night. I went upstairs, sat on the edge of the bed we'd shared for 16 years, and understood that our marriage now belonged to a different story than the one I thought I'd been living inside. It wasn't fixed in one conversation. Some mornings I woke up angry, some mornings guilty for ever doubting him, sometimes both before breakfast. David never told me I was wrong to feel that way, and he answered every question, even the ones that made him look terrible, especially those. Some mornings I woke up, and for a few seconds before I fully remembered, everything felt normal. Then it would land on me all over again, not like a fresh wound, but like an old one you keep forgetting to be careful with. David never pushed me to move faster than I could. He answered the same questions 2 and 3 times over in different words, at different hours of the night, whenever I needed to hear them again. He didn't get defensive when I asked something that clearly stung. He just answered. A month later, I found him on the back porch turning the GPS tracker over in his hands. I've been thinking about throwing it away, but it reminds me what happens when people stop talking. I sat beside him. For a while, neither of us spoke. The silence no longer felt uncomfortable. It simply felt honest. I keep wondering, he said eventually, what would have happened if Daniel had never found me? I looked toward the yard. I think you would have spent the rest of your life wondering about someone you never knew existed. And you? I would have spent the rest of mine believing I knew everything about my husband. We looked at each other. Both of us understood the irony. Neither of us smiled. Lily eventually learned the truth too, only the parts that belonged to her. David sat with her one Saturday afternoon while I stayed nearby and let him speak. He told her about mistakes, about fear, about a young man he'd lost and found again. He didn't make excuses. He didn't ask for forgiveness. When he finished, she sat quietly, then asked the only question that mattered. So, I have a brother? You do. And Ellie's my niece? Yes. She stood up. When do I get to meet them? He laughed, a real laugh, the first one in months that wasn't carrying hidden pain behind it. The first time I met Daniel properly, we sat across from each other in Claire's living room, both of us unsure where to look. He had David's eyes and a stranger's caution. I'm sorry, he said finally. I know this must have turned your whole life upside down. It did, I told him. But that's not your fault. None of this is your fault. He nodded slowly, like he'd needed someone to say that out loud for a long time. Ellie ran in a moment later with a folded walker leaning by the door, Claire's father's, from physical therapy, and the sight of it quietly answered a question I'd been carrying for weeks. All those Friday transfers, all that cash, gas money, groceries, help with medical bills a young family could barely afford on their own. Not hush money, not guilt money, just a father trying, clumsily and too late, to be useful to a son he'd missed 20 years of. Trust didn't return in one conversation. It returned in hundreds of ordinary moments, one honest answer, then another, one promise kept, then another. A few months later, I drove past the old brick house again. This time, I parked in the driveway. Ellie ran out to meet me. Aunt Amy, Claire smiled from the porch. Daniel fixed the loose porch swing. David and Claire's father argued about baseball in the backyard. Lily sat on the grass, helping Ellie color a picture, 5 stick figures under one yellow sun. That's Mommy, that's Grandma, that's me, that's Grandpa David. She pointed to the last figure. I didn't know what color your shirt was, so I made it blue. She hadn't drawn 2 families. She'd drawn one. Children rarely understand the complicated rules adults create. Sometimes they're better off because of it. I smiled through tears. It's beautiful, Ellie grinned. I know. The whole yard laughed. Even me. For the first time in months, it didn't hurt. Not because everything had been fixed. Because healing had finally begun. Just a few months earlier, I had looked at this house and seen betrayal. Now I saw people trying to heal from a mistake that had waited 22 years to be discovered. Not a second family, not a secret life. Just people connected by one terrible decision, trying to find a way forward without hurting each other any further. Life didn't return to normal, not immediately. The movies get that part wrong. Truth doesn't fix a broken marriage. It simply gives 2 people an honest place to begin rebuilding it. And slowly, the ordinary life I thought I'd lost began returning. Not exactly as it had been. Something quieter, something stronger. Because this time, It wasn't built on the belief that we knew everything about each other. It was built on the understanding that love sometimes means telling the truth, even when you're terrified of what it might cost. Sometimes I think back to that rainy Friday, to the kitchen window, to the words I overheard. If I had walked away 30 seconds earlier, I would have spent the rest of my life believing my husband had betrayed me. Instead, I stayed long enough to hear just enough, to misunderstand everything. The most dangerous lies aren't always the ones other people tell us. Sometimes they're the stories we finish writing ourselves before we've heard the ending. If you're listening to this and something already feels off in your own marriage, the silence at dinner, the phone turned face down, the excuses that don't quite add up, don't wait for a Friday to add up to something you can't unsee. Talk before the cracks turn into chasms. If this story reminded you that the truth is often more complicated than it first appears, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Tell me, what would you have done if you were standing beneath that kitchen window? Would you have knocked, or would you have walked away? Let me know in the comments where you're listening from, and subscribe if you want more stories like this one.